From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the business of esports. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friends and co-hosts, Jimmy Barada and William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love, the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for buying Business of Esports merch. If you've done that, if you haven't done that, I encourage you. I know a lot of people came up to me at the Esports Business Summit asking for socks, and you can go find them at businessofesports.shop. If you want to pick up some of the socks, I wore them to the conference. They are very cool. I highly recommend them. How are you guys doing this week? Jimmy, William?
I'm doing really well. I wish I could say the same thing for my Valorant rank, but I'm having a good time. Yeah, a lot of great games came out recently that I haven't had time to play, and which has broken my heart too. So,
really, what games have come out, William?
Oh my gosh, what hasn't come out? Deathloop, Metroid, whatever it's called. What's it called? Not Metroid Prime, like the scary Metroid. New World, which I still haven't done anything significant in. And to top everything off, I wanted to go back and play the old Ubisoft title, I think Phoenix, like Immortals Rising or whatever it's called, their open world one that kind of went under the radar. A lot of people have said that's worth a look. So I have the biggest backlog catalog of games, and all I've done is about 2 matches of Valorant this week. So I'm way behind.
You're like the only person in the industry I know that complains that there are too many games to play. Literally every other complaint I hear is there's no good games. There's no new games. No one's making games.
No, it's so much better to have too many. Don't get me wrong. And this is a problem specific to me, which is I need to have more time to play games. So.
Don't we all? Jimmy? Don't we all? Yeah, I've been too busy. I've been out of the office since a week ago Monday. Haven't played any games this week. My New World character is just sitting on rested XP for me right now, so that'll be fun. When I get back in there, I'll shoot up a couple levels. But
how are you guys managing the deflation in New World? Isn't that a thing that's going on right now?
I don't think either of us have played.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I've read a lot about New World since I haven't been playing, and I'm interested to see what's going on once I log back in game. But there's definitely a lot of unhappy customers, I think, with the game's economy, and just issues of that nature.
You know what I'm interested in actually too? Our amazing guest this week, right?
I am. I just before we bring him in, I just wanted to say I was truly humbled, guys, by everyone who came to say hello at the Esports Business Summit. I want to thank everybody who came to say hi to me or to Jimmy. I think, look, this is Jimmy, I'm curious what you think, but it was a very impressive turnout, I thought, for the industry. Lot of big players there, and just lots of people in general. Everything seemed to be packed. To host a conference like that in a big venue in Las Vegas, I think was impressive. So just a shout out to the organizers there and to the conference they put on. I thought it was very impressive, and I thought even though I told the entire room of people and the panel that I was on that they were all wrong, I at least very much appreciated being there and thoroughly enjoyed it. I will say, for those listening who maybe didn't go or wanted to go and couldn't go, or for whatever reason, in my mind, and Jimmy, I'm curious to get your thoughts, but in my mind, the theme of the conference most definitely was authenticity and content. It was all about content and authenticity.
There's so many buzzwords. It's funny. Authenticity was definitely thrown around a lot. Something that a lot of people gravitate towards, and a lot of meetings I had in the week leading up to the conference as well, where people were using that as far as maybe their company adding a new esports vertical, wanting to get in this space, doing it in a way that is authentic. I think you're spot on there. I will say, I've been to Vegas probably 6 times in the last 2 months for work-related purposes.
Yeah,
Our
it's
guest
been
who
a
we're about
lot.
to bring on, I met him at G2E where he was a panelist, as well as the Casino Esports Conference. And in comparing, all of these different events, Esports Business Summit, my first time attending a lot of these events, EBS was a lot larger than I expected. It was a lot more. I thought that the panels were really just drove this in-depth discussion. A lot of the times it's hard, you just scratch the surface. That was one of my criticisms, I think, on the show a week or two ago. And I thought, at least for EBS, we really were given the time, to get into I remember sitting in on an XSET panel and it went over by about 30 minutes because no one wanted to stop the conversation. The room needed to be used for the next one, but like all those panelists came in and sat and listened too. So I was really impressed by, I think, the level of discussion that was had.
Yeah, I will also just apologize to our listeners. Last week's podcast was very late coming out because Jimmy and I were doing it from hotel rooms. Required quite a bit of work to make that sound decent, or at least to our standards. So apologies that episode was late, but it was the sort of unusual case where literally everyone was on the road that week, or in Vegas that week, or in someplace else that week. And so thank you for being patient with us and still tuning in to listen to that episode last week, because it was an amazing episode. We had Steven Sauls from Rivalry. And so if you haven't already, go back and listen to that, even though it came out late. Definitely go back and listen to that episode. Today's guest is, we just keep getting better and better. Although fellow Canadian, interestingly enough, we seem to have this string of Canadians on the podcast. It's none other than Marius Adomnica, who's on the podcast today. He's an esports lawyer with Segev LLP. Marius, welcome to the Business of Esports podcast.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Marius, for our listeners who maybe don't know much about you, would love for you to give them a bit of your backstory, how you got into gaming, how, what you're doing now, what you're focused on now, what you're excited about now, just a bit of the Marius and gaming / esports story.
Sure. So I got into gaming when I was 3 or 4 years old, I assume. So I've been a gamer all my life. I've been practicing law for about 10 years. I've been doing esports law for about the last 4 or 5 years, sort of when, let's call it the esports boom started happening, when people started investing in legitimate businesses starting getting off the ground. I thought, well, I'm already into this stuff. I like to go to random bar crafts, and I remember going to this stuff 10 years ago, and it wasn't really popular, and people were like, oh, professional video games, what a concept, stuff like that. So I thought, well, hey, why don't I just sort of move my practice area towards this a little bit. So I like to joke that I'm one of 3 esports lawyers in Canada, which is actually not that far off from the truth. It's me and 2 other guys in Toronto, basically. And yeah, I've been doing esports law for about, like I said, around the past 5 years. I represent some players here and there. We do some talent management. I co-founded a pretty small talent management agency with some clients. We also represent for our firm a lot of public esports companies up here in Canada. I also, serve on boards like the Vancouver Esports Association and various other industry groups. Do consulting for esports companies. I also have a very, very rarely updated blog called The Patch Notes that deals with esports and video game law. I think my last post on that was more than a year ago, actually, so maybe I shouldn't even plug that. But I've been meaning to get back into that, but there's just never enough time. So yeah, that's me sort of in a nutshell. That's my involvement in esports.
Marius, it's a very clever name. I love The Patch Notes. but this is clearly a game that doesn't get patched very often. So it must be just in a great state, right? It's just.
Oh yeah, the dev team has stopped working on it. Yeah.
No, would love. You mentioned you were one of 3 esports lawyers in Canada. I'm curious why, given how much of this, at least public esports companies have exploded in Canada, right? We talked to Steven from Rivalry last week, and they're listed on TSX Venture now, and Canada has become a bit of the Wild West of public esports companies because of TSX Venture and sort of the ease of going public there, and just sort of Canadian market's appetite for things that are a little bit more risky. I'm curious, why do you think you are only one of 3? Is it that, I'm just curious why you think that is.
Well, I think, there's really, the industry still getting off the ground. And I say one of 3 facetiously. Like, there's a lot of other securities lawyers who sort of do securities law, and as part of that, they sort of handle esports companies. I like to say I want to free because I'm like, I'm a gamer. I'm into this stuff. I'm involved with the industry beyond the public esports companies, and just sort of a player management. I just kind of follow what's going on, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's definitely been a lot of sort of uptake in the legal field about this. There's sort of big national firms right now are sort of getting involved in the space. They're sponsoring events. Just recently, our neighbors here in Alberta, the Alberta Esports Association got a sponsorship from a large law firm based there. And just, it's like a old school white shoe, very well known law firm. And we're like, yeah, well, let's sponsor this sort of small, we're not that small, but sort of industry organization, just because, we want to do more of this stuff. So it's definitely recognized that it's a growing field, and lawyers are definitely getting involved.
And I'm curious what you think, what was the reaction when you decided to pivot your practice to esports or gaming, internally at your firm? Were they saying you're crazy? Is there an understanding in the legal field in Canada that this is, a huge new form of entertainment, and there's a ton of opportunity here? I'm just curious internally, what was some of the thinking or the reaction?
I don't know. They were very supportive. It wasn't really a big announcement I made on one day. It's just kind of a gradual thing. There wasn't a specific decision I remember making. It just kind of, I was like, oh, I'll start this blog, or I'll do this, and it just kind of snowballed a bit. But yeah, my firm has been all for it. Because they're aware it's a growing field. We're a very techie firm. All these kind of new tech trends, esports, blockchain, cannabis back in the day when it was kind of getting legal, and it was a new field. NFTs now, all that stuff. We try to stay on top of it. So we're any kind of new field, we're yeah, go for it. And also we do a lot of work in the other gaming, gambling. Probably one of the best known firms in Canada in that field. And there's a lot of overlap between esports and gambling. There's a lot of people starting esports betting companies, esports betting. I read a stat out there that esports betting handle, the total amount bet on esports last year was something like $14-15 billion, whereas the industry itself is 1 billion. So there's 15 times as much bet on the industry as the size of the industry itself. I'm not sure how accurate that stat is, but don't sleep on esports betting. It's a big industry.
Well, I know, William, you have some thoughts on that that $1 billion.
Yeah, the 1 billion number is not right. Just if anyone wants to know, this is like, Marius, you bring up a great point. How can the size of the wagering be this big when the industry is this big? I think the true size of the industry was about 27 billion a few years ago. I did a research paper with a few people that sizes what I think is the accurate size, and it's much bigger. If you're curious, the biggest reason for the difference is in that commonly cited $1 billion number. It doesn't count any revenue from the games, right? So if I buy a skin in Valorant, that doesn't go into that $1 billion number, which sort of feels weird because the games themselves are a primary way that they are the sport. So it's weird that you don't count direct spending on the sport in the sports number. But yeah, I sort of go to a wider point regardless of the market sizing, which is, there's a ton of emerging trends in esports? Obviously, you talked about one of them. Are there any other like big legal trends you see in esports with other industries coming in or merging that our listeners would, kind of be curious to see, and get a kind of a tidbit of being at the vanguard at?
One sort of legal issue that I see sort of on the horizon is basically I don't know if it's really esports, but or you can consider this esports, but there's a lot of sites coming out right now that are basically P2P betting sites where you can play a game of Madden against somebody else for real cash. You can bet on it. There's I think 50 of these sites up right now. They've definitely grown over the last couple of years. They're getting some positive news coverage right now. Like the Wall Street Journal did an article about them a year ago. It was like, hey, people during the pandemic are sort of doing this to keep them self-distracted. It was a very positive spin. But I mean, long term, the way these sites are operating, they're claiming that they're sort of skill gambling, which is generally legal. But that hasn't really been determined. Unless an actual court opines on it, you don't really know. And it would actually also vary game by game. So some games have a lot of RNG, a lot of randomness in them. So it's potentially less likely they'll be found to be a skill game than say a shooter. That's probably defensible as a skill game, but something like Hearthstone where you have card draws and stuff like that, definitely not a skill game. So these sites are kind of operate. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Marius, are you implying that therefore those P2P betting sites that are claiming, these are skill games may get regulated like pure betting sites? Is that?
I'm not. I don't know exactly what will happen, but I think something potentially can happen. The way I can't speak to U.S. law that much, but Canadian gaming law is drafted in such a way that if you stare hard enough at it, pretty much everything's legal. So if you want to call these sites legal, you can. The issue really is enforcement. Right now, the government basically doesn't care. They're these sites are flying under the radar. Everyone's fine with it. But as they start getting more attention, say there's some bad news stories about some kid took his dad's credit card and lost $3,000 playing Madden, stuff like that. The government's going to start paying attention, and I think you might see some kind of issues coming up with these sites. It's kind of similar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with DraftKings and all these daily fantasy sites. Kind of the same thing. For a long time from when they were founded, they just kind of operated as skill gaming. Nobody cared, and it was fine. And then they started running all those ads. They got a lot of media attention. And then suddenly the exact same laws, the laws didn't change, but 50 AGs went after them saying, what you're doing is illegal, and all this happened. So really, it's not the letter of the law that matters as much as the public incentive to enforce it. And if these sites start getting more attention, I kind of see that as being a big issue later on. If you're asking me about the biggest sort of sleeping giant legal issue in esports, I'd say that's it, although it's more of a gambling issue than an esports issue. But
it's funny because, I mean, this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but the conference Jimmy and I were at, we were sitting at lunch at a table with someone from the Nevada Gaming Commission, and he was saying the casinos don't want player versus player skill games because they're saying the players don't want it. They've put these machines out for skill-based games, and no one played them, no one wants them, and supposedly there's only 8 what was it, Jimmy? 8 machines left across all casinos in Nevada or something, basically collecting dust.
Yeah, just kind of an inversion towards that whole side of things, I think, in general, right? It just
which makes me wonder if I believe a lot of the hype around the esports betting space, I'm a little bit more skeptical of the player versus player kind of betting. But it's interesting that you think that's potentially a legal minefield coming down the road. That certainly won't help that part of the industry's chances. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they might survive it. DraftKings survived, and they're worth $1 bajillion and all that stuff. So even though some issues may arise, they can defend that stuff in court. Maybe they win, maybe they don't. I mean, there's a case to be made, but a lot of these games are pretty skill-based. Like, they don't have enough randomness in them to be considered gambling. But it's really a case-by-case issue. You really have to look at each game specifically. Like, a MOBA is completely different from a shooter. It's completely different from like a card game like Hearthstone. It's completely different from like a sports game, for example. And what's true for one class of games may not be true for another.
So taking a step back, I think from this specific issue and the specific entry point or business model in the industry with the P2P betting games, I'm a little bit more curious as to the nature of your services, of what your firm provides, in the sense that, is there, back to kind of Paul's question about themes, but more towards, I guess, your client base or what people are asking you, something that's more broadly applied. Are there certain trends or certain services that a lot of your clients are asking for now that any of our listeners, as potential clients or that have similar needs, might be interested in, that they're not looking in that direction quite yet, or unaware of something that they need to be cognizant of?
We always get questions about the gambling stuff. We have a few clients who are sort of working on similar sites, and we providing them legal opinions on this stuff. We also, we do the go public transactions and all that, and we just do case by case contract reviews. Like, we do, a lot of teams they run contests here. We review that kind of stuff.
What's your sense of the go public market in Canada right now for esports? I mean, obviously there's been some big go public esports news. I think we're going to talk about it, if not on this, maybe in our live stream. But what's your read seeing that side of the market? Like, what does the transaction volume look like? Does it look like go public stuff is hotter than ever, as hot as ever, cooling off? Like, what are you seeing there in terms of deal flow?
It was definitely hot like a year or two ago. Recently, I would say it's maybe cooled off a bit. Like, there's been a few companies that went public a year or two ago, their stock shut up, and now it's coming back to earth a little bit. Biggest example would be like Enthusiast. I think like their market cap peaked at over $1 billion, I think, a while ago, and now it's back at like 500 million, which is still nothing to sneeze at, definitely. But yeah, there's been like a bit of a cooling off, I would say. Not, hasn't bottomed out or anything, but definitely cooler now than it was a year or two ago. And that's probably to be expected at this point. Like any sort of hot new industry, you're going to have like the sort of a glut of companies going public. Some of them make it, some of them don't. And there's going to be sort of creative destruction that happens a few years later, and some survive, some don't. So I think we're kind of in that churn phase right now.
Marius, I assume you have good visibility on that pipeline. Like, do you think there's going to be another wave of these, and will they be sort of in specific verticals? Do you think you're going to see a lot more content kind of gaming companies go public in Canada, like more enthusiasts, or are we going to see more rivalries? Like, what does that next wave look like to you in terms of the Canadian market, and who's going public there?
It's tough to say what specific area. I mean, basically, you just need a good plan and a good business, and whatever it is. I think a lot of the time, like most investors, just see esports and don't really differentiate between like P2P betting sites, content plays. It's just kind of esports to them. But in terms of like businesses that can be successful, I would definitely say like businesses on the content side would have like a much better shot than pure esports, like actual competitive gaming businesses. Because I mean, really, like, I think the biggest lesson for the last year or so of esports has been like that the field really belongs to the content creators instead of the players. Like, when people are retiring from playing competitive esports just to stream full time, and the streamers are making 10 times as much money as the pros, and they're much bigger names than the pros, and that really shows where the industry's at. I think like esports is almost a misnomer at this point. It should be called like the digital content creation industry or something like that, of which esports is a part, but not even necessarily the main part. I mean, when you look at like what it takes to sort of run a live event and organize it, and you have to pay for staffing, I had a client recently here who had like an event at the Vancouver Convention Center. Huge amounts of effort went into it. Like it was planned for like over a year in advance. All this stuff went on. And I kind of thought, there's a lot of streamers who can probably just from their room get like similar views to what these guys spend all this effort to get if they're big enough, like if they're the top guys. And when you look at that, like you kind of think like, that's where the eyeballs are, that's where the ad revenue is heading, and that's really running the industry. It's a much better business, honestly, content creation, than just running events.
Marius, one of the things, when I was building businesses in Canada, one of the themes for me was you're always looking towards the US, right? You want to see what your competitors in the US are doing. You want to grow in the US. You want to expand into the US. You want to, right? The US is always the market I find Canadian companies are looking at and going after. Is that the case with the companies you're working with in the gaming and esports space? Like, is a lot of the stuff, the help that they're looking for, centered around, doing business in the US, trying to compete in the US? Or do you find esports specifically, maybe compared to clients you have in other industries, are looking at it more globally and not so US focused?
I would say it's pretty global, actually. Like we have a lot of clients doing acquisitions sort of all over the world, like in Europe, like we have clients doing acquisitions in Ireland, Poland, all sorts of places. And I think that's kind of the magic of the internet, I guess. Like you can do a lot of this stuff from everywhere now. You don't necessarily need a physical presence in the US. A lot of this stuff, like I'm always impressed both in esports and just like in traditional gaming, gambling, how many successful companies are just based in all over the place, like in Eastern Europe, Asia, where labor costs a lot lower. You still can get like super quality staff. And I mean, people can access your site just as well if you're based in Eastern Europe as if they can if you're in the States, and you don't have to pay God knows how much in rent and overhead and all that stuff. So I think it's kind of like we're seeing the industry democratize it a little bit.
Have any of your clients expressed concern? Like this is a recurring theme the last few weeks on the podcast with all of the sort of heavy-handed Chinese regulation that's been coming down in terms of, how long kids can play, when they can play, what games they can play, where games, what platforms the games can be on, et cetera. Like, have you been fielding sort of questions around what is that landscape, that gaming landscape look like in China now? And is it too risky to be operating there? Like, I'm just curious if the Chinese regulation thing has come up in your day to day.
It's come up a little bit. I mean, most of our clients are on the content side, so we're not. Those restrictions would affect the publishers more in terms of access to the game and all that stuff. But just the general, I think the biggest issue of that is sort of like the approach to gaming that the government there is taking. It's almost being seen as like a social ill at this point, like something we have to prevent kids from like abusing. I know a while back, like I think gaming addiction disorders was added to the DSM-5 manual for like, it's basically an official psychological condition now. And like, I think like long-term, that's something the industry really needs to be careful about because, there is a potential for, I don't want to say like abuse, but like, gaming does like, they've done studies on this stuff, like the level of dopamine and the stuff it does to your brain. Like it's addictive. It's similar to smoking cigarettes, apparently, that kind of thing. And you can probably end up in situations where like kids are playing a lot more than they should be. And, a lot of people who aren't involved in gaming get concerned about that. Oh my God, my kid's spending 8 hours a day in his room and not coming out and just playing video games. And I think more and more governments are going to take note of that. And like, I don't think China is the last government to do something like that. I think there's already restrictions similar in Korea and a few other places. And I think, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 30 years, but it's possible you may see just a change in the social approach to how gaming is perceived and should be regulated from just like this fun activity that we don't care about to like, something that we want to protect, kids or vulnerable people from, again, I don't know if abusing is the right word, but sort of,
No, North America, I think in general, has sort of avoided a lot of this for the most part. There's a lot of discussion here, but no action taken. Canada's a much more heavily regulated market than the U.S. In all things, pretty much. Do you think this kind of Chinese regulation comes to Canada in some way? Do you think we start to see restrictions there? Is the crackdown on loot boxes more than anything? That's something we've talked about many times on the podcast. Canada's no stranger to heavy-handed regulation either.
I don't think anytime soon. I haven't heard any talk in North America about anything like this. I don't think there's really any huge appetite for it. I think you're going to see a loot box regulation a lot faster than you see something like this. Although I guess there's sort of a comparison to draw between gambling and video gaming. If you agree that gaming can be sort of addictive potentially. It's not a drug. It's not something physical you're putting in your body, but it's sort of, if we're agreeing that it's potentially an issue, the only other comparable to that is gambling. It's the same thing. Gambling doesn't involve drugs. You're not doing anything to your body, but we've agreed that, people under 18 sort of should be controlled and can't fully be trusted to make their decisions on that. And, maybe we see the government say maybe some of these games are potentially an issue too down the line. But, this is just me spitballing. I haven't seen anything like that in North America. I don't think we're likely to see anytime soon. And if we do, I doubt it's going to be as heavy-handed as just locking accounts during the week and 1 hour per weekend and stuff like that. That's just, I think only a few countries in the world can enforce stuff like that, and China is one of them.
So are these things, sorry, Paul.
I'm
curious, are these some of the issues that the Vancouver Esports Association was formed to discuss and protect, or what can you tell us more about your involvement in founding that and kind of what you guys do over there?
We were involved primarily, sort of helping the industry grow, sort of however we can do that, we'll do it. If we can help streamers out, help them get off the ground, if we can help people organize events, provide them resources to sort of keep things operating. Basically, whatever we can do to help, we're there to help. It's very much like a work in progress. We're still figuring out how we can help, but whatever we can do, we'll do it. In terms of this specific issue, we haven't talked too much about it. We're in touch with some other organizations in BC that are involved in sort of lobbying the government on behalf of the video game industry as a whole. This is something that I think occasionally comes up in their talks to the government. So there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding of how video games work, and a lot of, I don't want to say fear, but concern by a lot of people in government in potentially high places who don't play themselves and don't understand it. There is that stereotype of the kid who spends all his day playing video games and doesn't go out and make friends and play sports, and maybe we should be doing something about this. Not of a level where there's direct regulations or anything like that, or anything is proposed, but in terms of how people think in government, there is a bit of that here as well from my conversations with people.
What does the current state of esports lobbying look like in Canada? And if you can generalize to esports lobbying in general, because I think a lot of people, when they hear lobbying, they think healthcare companies, asking U.S. senators for, drug price, something. What is happening? Is it more informational in games today? Is it this is actually what games are? It's not Nintendo. I'm curious, what is the lobbying activities you see in Canada? What do they typically look like?
Right now, honestly, there's not too much lobbying on behalf of the esports industry that I'm aware of, partly because the industry really doesn't want that much from a government at this point, and there's no real legislation affecting the industry specifically. There's no esports act or anything like that. If the government ever starts sort of regulating esports more directly, I guarantee you're going to see a lot more lobbying, and people are going to be very involved in that. But at this point, the industry it's still very small. Also, that's another thing to keep in mind. In Canada, there's a few public companies that we talked about. There's a few tournament organizers here and there. There's a lot of medium amount of like pretty decently sized streamers, and that's kind of the industry. And like, there's really not like one big coalesced industry habit where you really want the government to change right now. There's no like, oh, you really need to like pass this law and give us these tax breaks or anything like that. Most of the lobbying you see here from the video game industry deals with sort of traditional video gaming, like the gaming studios and stuff like that. There's various tax breaks that each province has, and there's a lot of lobbying about how to increase those breaks. There's like competition between provinces, like people say, oh, this province is giving us this much, we can move there, you guys should match them, that kind of thing. There's a lot of that kind of lobbying that goes on, but not so much in esports.
Guys, before we move on to some news, I don't know, Jimmy, William, do you guys have any other questions?
Yeah, the patch notes. You joked that you haven't updated it in a while. Obviously, I love the name, and I was taking a look at some of your writing. I just have, I'm just curious if you're going to pick that up again. I think that's something our readers would definitely be interested in. What kind of, I suppose, what story, is it just something that you're inspired to write about a certain issue? I read your article on loot boxes and loot crates rather. I'm just curious, I suppose why you got that started and what it's going to take to get you to start writing again.
It's finding time, basically. That's the thing. Like, yeah, it's something I've always like had in the back of my mind. I set these goals, oh, I'm going to do one article a month like that, or stuff like that. But there's just never enough time. I think like the older you get, the less time there is in this world. Like I remember when I was in university and I just had all this time, and I think back now, like all this time I spent just sitting doing nothing. I could have been doing productive stuff. And now I want to do productive stuff. I don't have that much time. So yeah, it's just time and getting around to it, honestly. Like there's a quote in there by like this screenwriter that says, the easiest thing in the world to do is not write. It's very easy to just like procrastinate and not do anything. And that's basically what I'm doing, but I'll just have to force myself and hopefully turn that around.
Guys, we have some news this week that I wanted to get into, especially Marius with you here, because there's, I think, an interesting legal angle to some of these. You mentioned in your intro that you guys do some talent management, and I think one of the bigger stories this week, in fact, the official announcement was today. We record on Wednesdays, so as of Wednesday, it was announced by Pokimane, and this is just, I'll show her Twitter sort of announcement here. It was, I'm so happy to announce the launch of my talent management plus brand consulting firm, RTS. Our goal is to make creators' lives easier and help companies integrate into gaming. If you click through to the website, she is listed as a co-founder and chief creative officer. The subheadline here says, company sets course to fix the gaming and esports industry, chiefly around evolving the creator business model, avoiding bad brand deals, and developing sound esports strategies. Now, I listened to a bit of her announcement on her live stream. A big part of her discussion and her announcement was, people are taking too much of our money as creators, so I'm going to fix this. And, the agents take 10% and the managers take 10%, and we shouldn't be giving away 20%. To other people. And so this was kind of the crux of her rant. Marius, I'm curious to start with you, what you think of, a streamer getting into the talent management business. Is this brilliant? Is this doomed to fail? The fact that Pokimane's not a lawyer, does this hurt her? I'm curious your view on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious exactly sort of how it's going to work, like what Pokimane's involvement is going to be in the business beyond just sort of being the face of it and the brand name. I think, I think this is like a testament to sort of like the growth of sort of the creator economy and just how sort of big some of these influencers are and how much like real money there is to be made off of this stuff. Like I think I saw that their venture is actually backed by like Endeavor, which is like one of the biggest talent agencies in Hollywood. And
the CEO was formerly at Endeavor.
Oh, formerly. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, and I'm always surprised, like a lot of these influencers where you deal with them, like their management, it's like creative artist agencies, Endeavor, like all these like high up Hollywood agencies, and I'm like, half the time, honestly, I'm a bit surprised, like that it's gotten to this point already. But it shows just sort of like how established and sort of powerful these individuals can be, and how they can use their brand sort of to sort of build something. In terms of how her agency is going to work, I mean, I think, anybody who's trying to start a marketing agency or a agency that helps creators is going to tell you the biggest problem you're going to have is sort of actually getting clients. And if you're just, Joe Schmo off the street, you're going to have to like work your way up, and you're going to have to like scratch and claw your way to get those first few clients. And it's already like a pretty competitive industry. There's a lot of these firms out there. So one advantage she has is her name, the initial sort of publicity, and she's going to have no trouble getting her first, few clients, I'm sure. Whether this business is going to succeed or not, like I think really comes down to the people she's going to have actually running those sort of influencer accounts, managing those relationships, and actually doing work with those influencers. Because ultimately, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, if they don't do a good job, it doesn't matter if Pokimane's on the masthead or not. The clients are going to move on. So I think she has like a running start. Basically, she has like a much bigger head start than a lot of people would if they were starting something like this. But it's all in how she uses it and how that works. And I mean, if she has somebody who was formerly at Endeavor, but CEO at Endeavor or something like that, I'm sure she's got sort of some high caliber staff on there. But yeah, we'll see how it works out.
William, Jimmy, I'm curious what you guys think of this in general, but more specifically also, do you buy the premise here? Like, does the creator business model need fixing, right? Like there's a pretty bold statement made here that we're going to fix this.
I think there are elements of the creator business model that definitely need addressing. Like the fact that this current systems basically create incentives to overproduce content or always produce, right? Which I think, I mean, when we've had, for example, when we had, who was it? Was it the former, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name. We had a couple former streamers and team owners on the podcast who spoke pretty openly about the stresses, like the psychological stresses that streaming produces, right? So, I think there are elements that need adjusting, and I think that Pokimane is probably incredibly well positioned to do it, both because her brand is very big and very neutral, right? Like, and I mean neutral in a positive way. Like, I don't think she doesn't have a strong content. Like if I say Dr. Disrespect doing this, you're gonna be like, whoa, that's not, but she's a relatively household. I mean, US senators appear on her live streams, right? She's sort of a Swiss neutral territory in terms of she has a big brand and it definitely stands for something, but what it stands for is safe and generally applicable. The bigger question I have is like these sort of cost out pitches never really appeal to me, right? Because the whole thing is, oh, people are taking too much money, we'll take the cost out. Well, how, right? Like these industries have had a long time to settle. I guarantee you that like, the talent agency models that came into esports were coming from other industries and using established benchmarks. This is a little bit like the Epic lawsuit against Apple being like, oh, these platforms charge too high fees. Why do they get 30%? Well, when you actually look at what they have to do, there's a lot, right? And there's a lot of risk inherent on the other side as well. So I'd be curious how, like, I think on sort of better representing creators, I think 100%, and she could be well positioned to do it in terms of taking cost out of the industry and empowering creators with more revenues. I'm really skeptical. I'd want to know more what she's intending to do. Because I don't see her agency being the low cost competitor here. That wouldn't be the positioning I would advocate Pokimane to take in the market,
It's a good point. But is the logical conclusion then that she's probably just slapping her brand on this and her involvement's not really that significant?
No, I think she genuinely believes in this is my honest take.
Believing in it and doing something are two different things, to be clear, William, right? Like
I think, and we've seen this with a lot of the big streamers. I mean, when we had who's I'm blanking, man, I'm so bad at names tonight. When we had Tyler Blevin's manager on the podcast.
Jessica?
Jessica, yeah. I mean, she was mentioning how Tyler wanted to transition his career, right, to be more than just a streamer, but I imagine Pokimane is a similar level of success. She's thinking similar. She's like, okay, I know if I did this for the rest of my life, I'd be known as one of the most successful Vanguard streamers who created the esports content ecosystem. But I want to be more than just esports. I think she genuinely will probably allocate some of her, again, this is pure speculation, I have no right, but like she probably will allocate time here because this is probably important to her and it expands her persona in the space. And to be honest with you, just bluntly, it's sort of a boring thing to do. Like starting a talent manager that's going to do esports strategy stuff. Like you have to be interested in that work. It's not like starting a pro team or something where like, oh, it's very adjacent to what she's doing. Like she clearly has a specific interest there. Again, whether or not her involvement is chief, I think she's chief creative officer. Is that right? Yeah. Like, involvement in chief creative officer also doesn't say like, rocking the contract negotiations, right? It speaks to a higher abstract level of involvement that's more about direction and marketing and things that are going to be very important to talent agencies. But, I would think like, I don't, again, this goes to my skepticism around the cost out model. I'm not seeing a lot of hooks in that announcement or in her pitch that explain how she's going to take cost out and deliver same service, right? This isn't like, where's the Amazon of bookstores here, Jimmy, what were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I like Marius's comment on how it's going to come down more to the people. I've dealt with and seen so many management companies and agencies, through the years, changing names, clients leaving for a number of issues. I just don't know if it's needed. So what I would say is, I think Pokimane has an amazing brand. I think she saw something that she experienced that maybe she didn't, or rather wish had better resources for. And it sounds like something, Paul, that's really authentic to her, right? Maybe she went through, for those of you watching, I just said that so Paul would shake his head. The listeners will just have to hear the pleasure in my tone now. But seriously, I feel like these streamers, as we said, they go through these experiences, Jess Blevins and Ninja. It's not just about capitalizing off of brand, right? It's about what did I go through as a streamer and what resources now can I provide to the next generation of streamer. And Pokimane's done that with her UC Irvine scholarship. And, here we see her doing it now for younger creators that are either taking bad deals because they need the help in negotiating and in procuring deals, or, they're just, for whatever reason, they lack the ability to do it themselves, as we see a lot of top streamers doing and leaving their agencies and leaving their management companies because, why would I pay that? Like you guys said, the model's there. It's not broken or in need of fixing.
But that's the bigger trend that makes me nervous in all of this is the top pros and streamers leaving the talent agencies, right? Because you don't see that in movies, right? Or in sports, or like, it's sort of like people complain about their agents, but they're viewed as inviolable. And maybe you swap agents and it's a big deal. The thing I wonder about is there's such a direct level of access that you have to streamers today, right? Because they're so present on social, they're so visible all the time, right? Does a lot of the work that gets done by agencies in terms of like sourcing deals, migrate, like, does that matter less because there's so many, and this is a bit of a hypothetical point, but like, because there's so many more contact points and so much more availability that like, like if you, I'm sort of saying this badly, but like essentially the interaction model that streamers have is fundamentally different from the interaction model the fans that like movie stars have. Does that mitigate some of the value in a talent agency? Because they're so accessible, they're so present. Some of the marketing, brand drumming, whatever, talent agency just isn't necessary here.
Maybe. I mean, my view on this is a little bit, my issue with this is different in the sense that I read this announcement and in some ways I see this often. It's let's create a fake problem, right? And then pretend like we have the solution. When in reality, literally every other talent agency on the planet, Evolved, Loaded, CAA, WME, like I can go through the list, We know them all. We've probably had all of them on the podcast at one point or another. They all do exactly the same thing that RTS is saying they do, right? Help them build their brand, help bring them sponsors, support them, alleviate the workload. Like I'm reading this, right? There's nothing unique here. There's zero. This is the most boring announcement of the last year. And the fact that Pokimane built this up, if you saw her socials in advance of this or streams, like I thought she was going to be announcing she was launching her own car company. Like it was this level of excitement when it's literally just another cookie cutter talent agency that 2 months from now, no one's going to talk about. Zero. And I guarantee you she's going to spend 0 minutes on this because fundamentally she's conflicted. You think she's going to bring her best sponsors, her best brand supporters, and her best ideas to other streamers? Like she's fundamentally conflicted. This is a nothing announcement. It's a boring announcement. I find Pokimane increasingly disingenuous and just not authentic at all. Like, hey, I don't want so much money. Keep your money. And now I'm in the talent agency business. So, because I want to solve this problem, I'm going to help the little guy. Like, it all just feels so manufactured and nothing about it is authentic anymore. I don't know. This is very cringy to me. And I think I don't know. I'm not saying it fails because there's no barrier to entry in the talent management business, right? Like I can just say I'm a talent manager now and William, I'll bring you sponsors, right? I'm going to bring you brand deals. Now I'm a talent manager.
Sounds great.
Right?
Yeah. Let's talent manage.
Right. It's just, there's no barrier here. So I'm sure they'll sign some people, but I don't think there's an interesting business here at all. And there's really nothing special in my mind.
What would change your mind, Paul? What would have to happen to change your mind? Like what?
Pokimane says, I'm quitting streaming. I'm doing this full time. All my sponsors I'm bringing to other. I'm starting with this roster of 5 people. All my sponsors I'm bringing to them. We're doing new activations with them. Like, give me something.
Yeah.
And 0 fees or something like that, right? We're gonna figure out how to make our money on the back end. We're not going to take anything off the top. The creator keeps everything. Something unique that we haven't heard a zillion times before.
I think that's a tall order. All I want to point to is, look at Rock Nation, look at Jay-Z coming out with his management label, all the talent that's on there. I'm surprised that you're not more, I don't want to say impressed, but rather accepting of her ability to use her brand away from her talent and create a second business that's generating income for herself and for others. It's a clever way, I thought, to extend really her career lifespan, because we don't know how long these content creator life cycles go. This is a relatively new, a new endeavor. And so I don't know, I don't want to say I'm impressed by it, but I do like that she's finding ways to expand her brand. I don't know if my dog rubbing his collar along the wall got through the mic there. I hope not.
In some ways, Jimmy, I see your point, but to me, it feels like just what is the opposite of authentic? Like, what is I don't even know. What is the opposite word?
Disingenuous.
Yeah.
Oh,
there you
go.
It's like a disingenuous cash grab, which, as a capitalist, I respect. Good for her, right? If she can get it. But let's not pretend like we're solving the world's creator problems.
I don't see it this way at all. Like I know that maybe your assessment of the outcome is accurate, but I generally see her as someone who has gotten to the stage in her life, like Jimmy said, where she's considering what can she do for others. She remembers her climb and the things that happened to her, and she's like, there should be somebody looking out to stop those bad deals. There should be somebody making sure I, keep 15% instead of 20 or whatever it is. Like, I think this is more just based on how much she promoted it, right? Like, I think this is much more genuine than you're giving it credit for. And I agree with Jimmy. There's plenty of instances of people operating an industry, converting their cachet in that industry to help others, right? Again, the outcome might be the same, but I think the view that this is somehow like a cash grab for her, there's easier cash grabs for her than starting a random talent agency. Let's be honest.
Really? Because this is literally just like licensing her name. right? She might as well do Pokimane steaks and Pokimane bottled water and Pokimane hotels and like at this point, why not just throw her name on everything?
Maybe that's what RTS is going to do, Paul. You're selling it short, like, you know.
All right, let's move on. I have one last story here before we wrap things up, and this is Guild Esports was in the news. Guild Esports terminates fintech partnership over delays in payment issues. So they announced the termination of their partnership with this unnamed European fintech company. The company cited delays in the sponsor's launch and the payment of sums as the main reasons for the deal's cancellation. If you guys remember, they announced this deal about a year ago. It was supposed to be £3.6 million spread out over 3 years. And according to Guild, they never paid. And they tried to be accommodating and patient, but basically they had to terminate it, and they're looking for new sponsors. Marius, I'm curious, how often have you seen this kind of thing in the esports space, if any? And B, specifically here, how frequently have you seen a deal like this where this is Guild that supposedly is canceling the contract, right? Like they're the ones expecting that had some claim to £3.6 million of contract payment. Is there a reason why you don't think they're suing to try and get that money or pursuing some other path? Like it seemed weird to me that they're just sort of canceling it.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say how shocked I am that a party to an esports contract wasn't making a payment when it was supposed to, or wasn't honoring that contract in some way. That never happens. This may be the first time. No, so yeah, this, unfortunately, you see this all the time in esports. You see it generally with smaller deals. Like this is like a pretty big deal. Like if it's like $3.5 million, presumably this is some kind of legit organization behind that, promising at $3.6 million. But yeah, it's not uncommon. It's still like, you still hear sayings about how it's a Wild West. It's not that wild anymore, but there's still a lot of this stuff going on in the industry. And the unfortunate thing is just the cost of litigation and the impracticality of it means that even if you're right and you have a contract that says, they owe you this much money, you'd win in court, it's almost never worth going after the person.
Even in the case of an amount this large? Marius?
I would guess that most likely this is Guild just kind of, they probably think that the company's insolvent or something like that, or even if we get a judgment, it's going to be a dry judgment, basically, so the company's not going to have money to honor it. So my guess would be that that's why they're not taking steps to sort of go after this money. I mean, the most important thing in any sports contract, or any contract really, like I tell 90% of my clients, is payment terms. Don't wait to get paid until 3 years down the line. Don't get paid in installments. Get paid up front as much as you can. Because once one party has that money, it's going to be very, very hard for the other party to make that money change possession through the legal process, basically. So don't just think, yeah, it's fine, I'm just going to sue them if they don't pay me. Because no, you're not. It's not going to work.
So is it a factor here, Marius, you think of legal cost, but also maybe they don't think the fintech company here in question could even end up paying? Should they even win?
Yeah, that's called being judgment proof in law, when you don't have the money to actually satisfy a judgment. So yeah, God could take them to court. They could spend a year or two getting to a judgment, or potentially faster, depending on what steps that company takes to defend that lawsuit. But if a company's bankrupt 2 years from now, we're not going to collect them that money anyway. So they might have made the decision of saying, we're not going to put more resources into this. We're just going to walk away and that's it. And I think part of it is that they're not really out that much anyway. Like if this was a sponsorship deal and they just had to promote the company, and I'm assuming their deliverables were spread out over the course of a few years too, and they don't have to provide those anymore. They don't have to take up that ad space. They can sell it to somebody else, that kind of thing. So they're probably happy just walking away and being done with it instead of trying to start something and for no real benefit in the end.
William, Jimmy, for you guys, Guild's a public company. If you're a shareholder here, obviously you're upset, right? That's a pretty significant deal. But was it maybe unfair then to announce this deal especially since they didn't even name the partner at the time, right? Like
that was my first
I remember
thought.
talking about it. Jimmy, go ahead.
No, I mean, like it's such a frustrating story because it's a non-story, and that was my first thought was like, okay, so it's just like the equivalent of a schoolyard rumor, you know? It's like
Yeah,
I don't know, you
can
just run around.
anyone say like, "Oh, I don't have a contract with an unnamed business for a lot of money"? Like it is a bit like it is like if you can do that, I guess, you know.
So
We need to put out a press release. We're canceling the $500 million deal we had with an unnamed tech company.
With like an unnamed international spy agency.
Believe me, guys, this could have been huge. It could have been really big, right? Like,
listen, when we say a $500 million, that's what we're allowed to talk about.
No, but like, look, did any of you think, because I'm pretty sure I said at the time, this smells funny when they don't even announce the name of the sponsor. Any of you guys think why the name of the sponsor hasn't come out yet? And Marius, maybe you have some thoughts on this as well.
My guess would be potentially there might have been some kind of settlement and non-disclosure agreement was signed as part of that. Or maybe they're worried about that company coming after them for defamation or something like that. If there's like, it's questionable whether they actually breached the contract or not, or they just don't want to start a thing with whoever it is in the media and have them fight back and all that stuff. Could be a number of things.
No, I like those. I think it was likely a brand issue. I don't think a non-disclosure definitely something there. I feel like you have such limited opportunities to create a name for yourself, right? That and having consulted for a lot of these startups, right? A lot of the time, they'll launch under one name, collect that data, maybe realize that they're slightly off base, pivot, and then rebrand because they don't want any of the negative effects from that first company to follow them. So clearly they knew that they had issues in launching their fintech platform, and I guess it was never solved. So kudos to them for keeping their name out of it. I guess that's the smart insight here. Just don't say your name until you're ready. I don't know.
Right. If the name does leak, right? Like, what are the chances that they're able to sponsor another esports business?
Right.
You got to think that this is obviously bad for business, but and the other question I had for you guys is, if I'm a guild shareholder, right? The shares dropped almost 10% on this news alone. Do I have any legal sort of angle? Like, do I have any? Can I go after whether it's guild or maybe more specific, like probably more aptly the sponsor here, or the purported sponsor, or
I would say that's pretty unlikely. Like, I'm not a UK securities lawyer, that type of thing, but generally speaking, like, the directors, the management of a company have pretty wide leeway over how they manage the company. So you have to like screw up pretty bad to have it get to the point where like a lawsuit against you could actually succeed. And something like this, where there's like a breach of contract, the company can't pay it, it's probably like a reasonable decision by management to say like, we're going to walk away. It's not necessarily a huge issue. And ultimately, if you're a shareholder, instead of like starting some kind of lawsuit against management, your biggest recourse is just trying to vote them out of the next shareholder meeting if enough shareholders don't like how management's doing.
Fair. Jimmy, William, you guys have any other thoughts on this before I wrap up here? Guys, then that wraps up this week's podcast. Marius, thank you so much for being on the show. For people who want to follow you, if you or find you, where can you be followed or found, or your firm?
You can find me, Twitter at Marius Adomnica. If you just Google Marius Adomnica Segev LLP, I'm sure I'll pop up. And the aforementioned patch notes, which I hope to add to at some point in the future.
There you go. Yeah, guys, definitely go check out patch notes. And for our listeners, guys, a couple of notes. One, we do a live stream every Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. We cover all the news that doesn't make it into the podcast. It's a lot of fun. We get to do it live with you. If you listen to this podcast, if you enjoy this podcast, definitely show up for that live stream because I guarantee you will enjoy yourself. Also, William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. Go buy it. If you haven't bought it, go buy it. If you've bought it, leave a review. Tell William how much you loved it. And it has a Spanish language edition. William, right, which you can also get on Amazon, correct? You're muted.
Yes, that's right. Spanish language edition, El Libro de los Esports, if I said that at all appropriately. So, yeah.
There you go. And there's an audiobook, which, by the way, a couple people have told me they really enjoyed listening to.
Which is narrated by me, so I don't believe them at all.
I was going to say, there's no way. But and make sure, guys, to follow Business of Esports everywhere: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever you get your content. Make sure to follow us everywhere. Jimmy, William, Marius, thank you all guys all so much. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.